Merry meet Annie here. I experienced a wonderful bit of sacred synchronicity this morning when I took out my notes to see what my daily reflection in the season of Samhain was for today. I saw that it was consideration of the labyrinth. Actually, in my notes, this is all that was on that page. There were no words aligned to that image because I know what it means to me. So at first I wasn't sure, well, should I write something different to share with my friends on YouTube? And then I thought, nah, let me expand on this topic a bit. It's a consideration of the labyrinth. And it's particularly awesome because this past week I have been preparing the next season of the Dedicant session, which is on Inanna and the descent of the goddess. Obviously, there are lines my mind travels every year at this time. Have you ever had the opportunity to walk a labyrinth? You might want to check and see if there are any near where you live. Episcopal churches often have wonderful labyrinths, and UU churches sometimes do too. Where I live, there are 6 labyrinths within easy driving distance. And I live in a rural area where you would probably not expect to find even a single one. You can walk a labyrinth anywhere you want to. All you have to do is imagine a circle on the land where you're walking and walk that outer edge of the circle. Then slowly spiral in smaller circles each time till you get to the center, and be at the center for a bit before spiraling back outwards, making one more complete circle at the outside. Well, there's also wonderful finger labyrinths. I was going to get mine out of my cupboard, but now that my chair's blocking the door, not doing that. And you can draw a labyrinth yourself on a piece of paper and then trace it with your fingers. There is also a couple of different really good labyrinth finder sites that'll give you insight into labyrinths in your area. Sometimes labyrinths pass through. Organizations will sponsor them for a short period of time, so you can watch out for that too. So what is a labyrinth? Most of us probably know, but some of us won't. It's not the same thing as a maze, although the definition of a labyrinth is it's a form of a maze. Mazes, though, generally have dead ends, and they're set to confuse you with lots of false starts along the way. Their challenge is simply to find your way in and out, physically. Labyrinths, though, are a kind of maze that is a path, usually circling or spiraling, which takes you without any choices to the center and back out again. The most important difference between the two, from a spiritual aspect, is that a maze represents choices in the path inwards, and a labyrinth is a singular path with no choices to make. Reading the history of labyrinths it's common to see that they are ancient, and the oldest ones go back to about 1200 before the Common Era. There have been tracings of ones that are older than that were walked into the earth, where some of these ones in the 1200 BCE, before the Common Era range, tended to be carved out of rock, so they're enduring. But there's traces long before that of labyrinths that may have been walked into the earth. 3 of those very old ones before the Common Era were in Spain, Italy, and India. And there are traces of extremely old ones, even 1,000 years older than that, in Russia. However, there are also labyrinths and traces of them all around the world. Every continent has its aspects and experiences of ancient cultures that traced a labyrinth on the land. It seems we've been making a trek through their circuitous paths for generations upon generations. The purposes to labyrinths throughout history have been varied. They've been seen as protection against supernatural powers, which I guess those powers weren't quite so super if they could get lost in a labyrinth. They may have been calendars. And they may have told the story of creation, transformation, and victory, even the history of the people who created them. And they've been a journey into the afterlife or the underworld, sometimes connected to tombs. And what can they mean to us today? They are an opportunity to suspend the experience of time. It takes quite some time to walk a well-designed labyrinth. The walk is a lesson in not hurrying. We learn to slow down and consider. They take us on an energetic journey of traveling not just to the center of the labyrinth, but to our heart, soul, energetic center. We learn to bypass the side paths that attract and distract us in life and focus on what matters the most. Most are designed with repeating patterns and doubling back as part of arriving at the center. We learn that there's no straight and true road through our lives. Labyrinths are sometimes called meanders. Don't you love that? Meanders. To distinguish them from mazes. Our lives indeed are long meanderings. Christian labyrinths, starting in the Middle Ages, took the place of a pilgrimage for those who could not travel. They can be so for any of us who walk them, no matter our religion or spiritual path. We learn that when we set aside illusion, distraction, and the need to hurry, we find the journey will reunite us with our spiritual selves. We often find our gods and our guides await us at the center of a labyrinth. I never know who I'm going to find there when I walk a labyrinth. But I have not yet, except for extreme, unusual circumstances, I have never been in the center of a labyrinth alone. Labyrinths are not just about the way in. Don't get me going regarding folks who walk a labyrinth, stand in the center for 2 or 3 seconds, and then straight walk out, ignoring the path. We learn that whatever we learn on an inward journey, it's meant to return to the outer world with us. One thing I've learned from walking public labyrinths. There's one here that I go to that I'm almost always the only person there. It's a solitary walk, and it's beautiful. But every now and then when I'm someplace at a labyrinth and there are a lot of people, even a few, if not a lot, it's a completely different experience because what you hear then is the shuffling of other people's feet and the breath of others. And you have an awareness of yourself in the midst of creation. It's amazing to walk alone, and it's equally amazing to walk with others. Was it a New Year's Eve or Samhain? I walked a large maze at an Episcopal church in the town where we used to live. This thing was huge, absolutely huge. It was 4 or 5 times bigger than my house. Well, I have a small house, but still, if you magnify that 4 or 5 times, it's big. And it was crowded. You had to wait your turn to enter so that the spacing could be comfortable. So every 3 or 4 feet in this huge labyrinth, there were others. And it was just... It was one of the most momentous labyrinth experiences I've ever had, and that's an odd one for somebody who likes to walk her path pretty much alone. So why does consideration of the labyrinth, that image that I shared to you, come up for me in this season of Samhain? It's a reflection that follows on my consideration of the descent of the goddess that's part of this season for me. For those of you who are familiar with the descent of the goddess and the Gardner-Farrer version, I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the legends of the descent of the goddess that are part of historical cultures. It's the powerful reminder, the labyrinth, that it's any chosen descent we make. It's not about staying at the center. It's about visiting it and then returning from it. And Goddess needs to make something that will endure out of her experience in the underworld. What she makes of it is as important as the time she spent at the depth of her descent. Most of us take on work in the season of Samhain that focuses on the hidden part of ourselves. We might call that inner work or shadow work, or we might name it something else. And no matter the name, the importance of the work is to travel inward, to dare to look into the eyes of our soul, to honestly see ourselves for who we are, and to be reunited once again with our true nature and our true will. That journey is part of the great work of the dedicated practitioner. Whether it's taken willingly and intentionally, or if we find ourselves thrust into a descent somewhere along the way. It's about what we find at the center, and it's about how we carry that out into the world, how we're transformed by it, what we choose then to make of it. Consideration of the labyrinth at this time in the season of Samhain reminds me, that's why it pops up, that the journey outwards has to begin. I'm somebody that will take all the time in the world to travel inwards and be happy staying there. There are lessons to be learned in the way out, as well as there were on the way in. They often have to do with hesitancy, doubt, fear, and, well, stubbornness. We often see clearly at the innermost point of our shadow work. Those moments when we are bluntly honest with ourselves. But we tend to want to hang on to old hurts, old emotions, and old patterns. The figurative walk back out of our shadow work labyrinth should be a leaving behind of those things and anything else which denies the wisdom we've discovered at the center. There's work to be done. And by the time we come back to the edge of the labyrinth's outer circle, we should be focused, determined, and passionate about living that wisdom. I encourage you all, as I encourage myself at this time of the year, to think of what you have discovered at your center. And if you have truly then journeyed back out of the labyrinth, or beginning to journey back out of the labyrinth, daring to be transformed by the experience. We can refuse to go inward, which is in its own way a great loss. But not making full use of the wisdom we discover when we journey inward, it's the greater loss. We must, in the end, journey outward. That is our life's calling. Indeed, our great work. From deep within the labyrinth, that is life, my friends, where I hope to meet you every now and then along the way, and perhaps at the center. I wish you mirth and reverence. Merry part.